Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Nutritional Revolution podcast. We have a coach here for you guys. We have Jason, the founder and head coach of Tenac Championship Coaching. As a USA Cycling professional coach, he has been coaching athletes for more than 20 years. And in particular, he coached the women's Leadville 2019 and 2020 winner, as well as the men's second place Leadville winner in 2016, and the 2019 women's national champ in cross country, marathon, short track, and the NUE series. So thank you so much for joining us, Jason.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So as many of the listeners know, we have started our Two Truths and a Lie. So before we learn too much about Jason and his history, I'm going to let you share with us your two truths and a lie.
All right. I had to dig a little bit back in the memory banks for this, but is it two truths and one lie? Or
yes.
Two?
Yeah. Okay. Don't give us two lies.
I've raced and coached athletes on every continent except for Antarctica.
Okay.
I stripped down a sailplane, which is a glider, and then I rebuilt it and flew it.
Whoa.
And a third, I was once the lead in a high school musical and asked not to sing.
Oh. Okay, Nia, what do you think?
I fully believe in 1 and 2, so I'm going 3, the High School Musical one.
I feel like the stripped down a sailplane and rebuilt it and flew it is something I would never think of as a lie. So I feel like that has to be real. I feel like it's absolutely quite possible you've coached athletes on every continent. So I'm going to agree with Nia on this one and go with number 3, but don't tell us the answer. We are going to disclose it at the end of the podcast episode. So let's jump back a ways, Jason, in your history, and how did you get into cycling coaching? How did that all evolve?
It evolved early on with me. My dad did a little bit of motorcycle racing, and I always dreamed about a motorcycle. But when it came down to it, I think my mom had a lot of influence, and I ended up getting a BMX bike.
Nice.
This is probably age 5, and so I raced BMX from age 5 to 13, and then I, kind of got burnt out and did some of the normal high school sports, and then mountain biking started showing up probably around 88 when I was maybe a junior in high school. And I did a couple of races. My dad bought the whole family some mountain bikes, and we did like a family ride and stayed the night at cabins, and then we rode back the next day, and I was kind of hooked on that. So
that's awesome.
That's kind of how it got started. And then from there, it was, once I started college, I went to Northern Arizona University. It's up in Flagstaff, Arizona, up in the mountains, and lots of trails there. That's where the fastest mountain bikers in the state were at the time, and probably still are. And so I raced the first collegiate mountain bike nationals in 1994.
Wow.
And then from there, when I graduated, I turned professional and was able to be a pro. I don't know what that means. You're barely living on anything. And but I was very passionate, and I was enjoying it. And what other time in your life are you going to be able to do that? And so I did that for about 7 years, and then just having some local athletes asking me, because I was the local fast guy, and they were asking me, what are you doing for training? And during that process, I was reading a lot of books and trying to learn as much as I could. I basically self-coached, which was a mistake in retrospect.
Oh,
no. And so I started a coaching business with a friend of mine, basically so we had gas money to get to the races, and we coached some 5 or 6 local people, and then one of my teammates, he was the first coach that CTS hired, if y'all know that coaching organization.
Yeah.
And so I had referenced him a few times, and he kept telling me, hey, when you're done racing, you should come out here and and do an internship or something,
Mm.
you know, if you really want to coach. And so I did that, and
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't believe how much I learned in those first 6 months of my internship. And
Wow.
yeah, I was offered a job after that, and then I worked for them for 11 years and had some incredible experiences that I would have never had on my own.
Right.
And worked with all sorts of athletes. I mean, freestyle skiers, tennis players, motocross racers, race
Wow.
car drivers, you know, because and that was part of the fun of it, was being able to break down the sports and what were the demands, and then what could we design for those athletes to make sure that they were ready for their event.
That's
And
neat.
then I just, you know, I had some ideas on how I wanted to do things, and so I moved on and I started my own business 9 years ago, and yeah, enjoying it here, and just coaching
Awesome.
athletes.
Yeah, that's great. And you work with athletes from all around. Well, maybe you shouldn't disclose this answer because it's one of your two truths and a lie, but it sounds like you work with clients and athletes from afar and potentially close to you, right?
Yeah, I live about 15 miles off of the border of Mexico, so it's up in the mountain. Well, it's pretty mountainous here. We're at 3,500 feet, but yeah,
Oh,
there's
wow.
not too many cyclists in my direct area. And then if you go up to Tucson, which is about an hour away, there's a ton of cyclists and a huge, incredible cycling community.
Yeah,
So
that's great. Do you guys, as with the Tenac coaching, do you do any training camps up there, or?
we have in the past.
Mhm.
I usually do private camps mostly.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether it's 1 to 4 athletes. Just I always had difficulty designing or building. I did a bunch of training camps when I worked at CTS. You know, we'd
Mm-hmm.
have 20 to 30 athletes, and I've done a couple camps in Italy,
Mm.
um, and just because the riding there is incredible, and just being able to take people there for their experience, for the experience of it. But it was more
Yeah.
like 7 people, pretty small
Yeah,
group.
that's awesome. And with your coaching now, do you have other partners in the Tenac the other coaches that you coach that coach athletes, or are you trained to coach athletes?
Yeah, no, I was able to we were able to gain more athletes than what I could coach. I do like to limit myself and try to
Mm-hmm.
keep the quality as high as possible. And then,
Yeah.
you know, had some fun mentoring some other coaches along the way. So I do have 3 coaches now that work with me.
Awesome.
And yeah, we meet every once in a while and do continuing education, and kind of pushes me to continue my learning,
Yeah,
and also coach them. I enjoy that part of it also.
that's awesome. With the continuing education piece, I mean, I know from like our sports nutrition world, the research is just like constantly evolving. Like it could change next month, something could come out, who knows about collagen and vitamin C supplementation. But with the continuing education, is there anything that you have noticed over the years that has really changed how you coach athletes that you've found with your continuing education?
Yeah, no, I've really taken on some different philosophies, especially when I broke away to start my own company. I am just to embrace, I guess, and I'm trying to remember how Bruce Lee puts it, but it's using using no limits as limits, or using no style as your style. So I don't particularly have a certain dogma. I don't like, oh, sweet spot training is it, or zone 2 training, or the HIIT training, or whatever different philosophy out there. But I think it's looking at the athlete and what they specifically need at that time, because there's more than one way to get an athlete to a peak performance.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it can be that they just need to change some things up. If they've been doing sweet spot training for 8 years or 4 years or something, their body might not respond to it the same, or even mentally. So
Yeah.
it's, that's part of our job is to figure that puzzle out with each athlete. Even along the way, I've noticed that I've had these athletes one, John Murphy, I coached him since he was 18 till
Wow.
he retired for about 17 years. And just how our relationship and how changed throughout the years, but also how my coaching style changed. And then this thing happened with him. And then I started noticing in a couple of other athletes where our relationship just became one where he knew what he needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it was more this talking back and forth about, he's given me the ideas. Hey, my body feels like this.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? And then I can say yes or no, or, hey, let's do that in 2 weeks, or that'll come later, or, oh yeah, let's do that. And in the last 2 years, right before Rose Grant won her first Leadville, I noticed that with her also. That's the ultimate. That's what I am in search of with all my athletes. I want them to get to a point where they can coach themselves.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, communication piece back and forth is obviously very helpful, right? With your clients. I think that's something we definitely see as well with our clients, is the feedback is important. I mean, we can have these certain expectations of what maybe we think would go as planned based off of maybe the science or something like that. But it's definitely, when it comes to like, one thing that comes to mind is always like gut training. It's like, it's so individual, and fluid losses too is another big one, sweat sodium losses. So yeah, I think that feedback is always so helpful. So through your career cycling, were there any nutrition or hydration, like aha moments that you maybe like changed something or started implementing something and noticed that it did maybe help with performance or your recovery or how you felt?
No.
It's kind of smooth. It just came easy to you. You were one of the lucky ones.
No, I think, or at least this is my interpretation, or like when I was racing, like it was, late 80s when I first started through the 90s. And I think nutrition was just then starting to become known as a big factor.
Yeah.
And there were new trends starting with gels coming out, or, it started with power bars and then the gels and things like that. But I don't think we paid enough attention to it. I mean, the most attention, we were sponsored one year by this company, and they gave us a little bit of data as far as what we should be thinking about and what we should be eating, but it was nothing to what we do today.
Yeah.
It was like, sometimes that would be a gel an hour, or we would drink this drink that was 1 part protein, 2 parts carbohydrates, like maltodextrin, just goop, and it was or just making up our own things, like our own drinks. We buy a can of maltodextrin at the store and put some salt in it and some water and go. Or you hear stories of like what other athletes are doing, and so you try it. And we were eating not raw potatoes, but cooked potatoes for a while, which still works. But for like XC racing, which I was doing, or short track, so I think, or even my mentor at the time, or I don't know, I wouldn't call him my coach, but he was an older guy, and we went around and raced, and he would always say, it's not a drinking race. And he would just have 1 water bottle on his bike for 100 miles. And that's, it's like, okay. And so you have that guy in your ear, and then you have what you're seeing in the magazines.
Wow. So you're saying he could do a 100-mile race with only 1 water bottle?
Yeah, he would do that consistently, and
holy Toledo.
To his detriment, and he was an older gentleman, and I think he's probably 68 or 69 now. But I remember even a few years ago, I had an athlete that I coached that was going and going to race him, and I was like, hey, you better watch out for this guy. He's pretty fast. He's in the 60+ category, but and then but I was like, he'll probably only have 1 water bottle. So day 1 he may be fast, but day 2 or 3 it's probably not going to be the same story. That was exactly what happened.
Oh man, yeah, that's rough. I wonder, he never experienced any heat stroke that you know of, or like heat overheating?
No, not that I'm aware of. So.
Wow. Yeah. That's the whole thing too, right? With like fluid management, is like everybody is so individual, and there's such a level of even training to tolerate certain levels of dehydration. It sounds like that's what he was very well trained for. That was a good level of dehydration. That's impressive. Amazing. So kind of moving into your coaching practice and working with athletes, we mentioned Leadville, but you've also coached athletes through Cape Epic. And for our listeners, we have many different types of endurance athletes. So we might have like ultra runners on here. Could you kind of explain what Cape Epic is and how that's different than something like Leadville, just from a distance and duration perspective?
So Cape Epic is 7 stages plus a prologue. It's in South Africa. It's usually late March. It's usually very hot. And they really, the race is, it's probably the biggest mountain bike race in the world, or it is. And so all the top professionals are there, and it's a big thing to win. The race kind of goes from vineyard to vineyard. You know, that's where the single track is on these private property vineyards. And so it can be very beautiful in that part, and probably very beautiful for the most part, but it'll be sandy dirt roads in between the vineyards. And I would say on an average, probably like a half of a Leadville, like a 4 hour, you know, going as fast as you can, probably typically day that's for the professionals. I've also coached just your average cyclist to go there, and it can be I remember one gentleman, it was 52 hours for 7 days of racing. So, you know, that's almost 8 hours a day. Where it came out for him. So it would be like a Leadville every day. So
Goodness. Yeah. And with something like that, I mean, when you're coaching an athlete, how far out are you wanting to start working with that person to prep them for something like Leadville versus a Cape Epic situation?
I'd say in both situations, it's probably going to, you know, at a minimum 6 months. You know, Cape Epic would start usually in November is when we would really start to train. Leadville can be in February. And sometimes I've had athletes call me in April and say, "Hey, I'm going to do Leadville. Can you help me out?" And that's not typically a problem if they have some base level of fitness. And so you can kind of start to fine tune things in those last couple of months. But if they don't have any fitness and they call you, then there's, you know, it might be an issue, and we'll see what we can do and see what's possible.
And what does that process look like when you first bring an athlete on? Are you having them do certain tests or getting baseline information? What is that like?
Yeah, I would say, you know, usually I like to start out with some sort of phone call like this. And, you know, and doesn't necessarily, I'm trying to find out everything about you in an hour phone call or anything, but because that's going to be part of the process of learning about this athlete along the way, but getting some basic information on what they feel are their strengths and their weaknesses, what events in the past previous years that they have felt the best, even if it's not an event. When have you felt the best, and why? Or when do you feel like you could have been better? And just get their perspective from it, and then take the data that they have. And nowadays, I mean, people have years worth of data, so we can download all that data into WKO is what I use, and then be able to just get a general overview. I mean, you can dive in a little bit, you know, if you feel like you need to, but a general overview, what's been going on, how much have they been training, and try to connect any dots of like, hey, when they said they were feeling good when this, and this is how much, you know, it can be arbitrary in some respects, but this is what the CTL number or their fitness was, or this is the type of intervals that they were doing, is probably a little bit more important, and see, you know, what kind of responses that they're getting. And if I can notice any patterns there, and if they can help me with that, then that's a great starting point. And then eventually, I mean, if they have a lot of data, you'll have some good information as far as what their power numbers are and what kind of athlete they are. but I do like to have athletes at least once a year do a power test, and we use Inside to do our test.
Oh yeah.
It's a software program where we're able to do 4 time trials and create a little bit better curve than 95% of 20 minutes is another way. So you can find just a little bit more in depth of who that athlete is, how they burn carbohydrates, how they burn fat. Where do we need to put a little bit more emphasis? Because if there's some sort of sprinter, like, in junior high, they were doing the 100-meter dash, because usually, early on you find out if you're a sprinter or you're more of an endurance person. And so if they're a sprinter and they're like, hey, I want to do Leadville, that's not in their wheelhouse really. And so we may need to change, some of what I would typically do with a different athlete. We may need to change the focus a little bit. So.
Interesting. And with that Inside testing, is that something that they need to be there in person to do, or is that something where the data can be transferred to like the WKO or stuff like that?
They can go to a local lab if possible. And, we can send them the protocol to the lab of what we'd like to do, or the Inside protocol. What most athletes do, and this has gotten better, is it's their performance power decoder, or PPD system, where the athlete just goes out on their bicycle and their surroundings, and we have a specific protocol that you use, and when athletes don't follow that, then because we feed this information into an algorithm basically, and it spits out the numbers, and they're fairly close from what I mean, within a couple percentage points if you were to go to a lab. So I think for all purposes it works really well for us, because we don't have to be there. They just have to follow the protocol. If they don't, then the algorithm notices it, and won't take the data. And I've had to go back a few times and ask the athlete, hey, can you do this 12-minute interval again? I hate doing that, but if we want to get the data, then that's what we have.
Yeah, that's great. And with an athlete like that, talking about like coaching them for lead up to whether it's Leadville or Cape Epic, how often are you suggesting, and I'm sure it's individual per client, but are you having them, are they on their bike 6 days a week, 7 days a week? What is that? What's kind of like a common theme you see with your athletes?
I guess it depends on the athlete, if they have a family or they're professional or whatever, but I would say 6 days a week is pretty normal, or doing some exercise. If typically a Friday is like a recovery day or something, then that can be an active recovery day. So it could be, hey, you could go to yoga, you could go for a walk in the park, or hike, or something like that. So I'd say on average, probably 5 days a week is a normal athlete working out.
Awesome. And with that, kind of bringing an athlete on, do you mentioned the Inside testing, do you have any of your athletes, or do you know if they've done any like sweat testing?
I've had some do in the past, but it was I don't know if I want to mention the company on here. It works okay, and it's fine, but it's not accurate enough. Actually, I'm hoping that we will coordinate with I don't know if you know Precision Hydration and Fueling. Those guys, we have a partnership with them. It's fairly recent, and they work with some Major League Baseball teams, and so they're going to be in Arizona in February, and they have their sweat testing equipment that they're going to bring, and we're going to try to coordinate and have some athletes get done with them.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the sweat sodium world is just so much information coming out from the research there that it's I think we're going to see a lot of changes in the next 12 months. I think, but it's pretty wild. All the stuff that's coming out.
We came upon that probably March, and started diving into, me and another one of my coaches diving into a little bit more of the sodium piece of it. And I was blown away. And then I started using it with myself. I don't really compete anymore, but I did do the Leadville stage race this year. I got invited with some friends to go there and do it. And so I used this little bit higher sodium than what I would normally do, almost double what I normally do. And wow, I felt great. I've continued to do that, and I've really started to feel good. And I think, yeah, I agree with you. I think it's gonna start. It's already turning heads, and I think it'll continue to.
Yeah, well, it's just wild how different individuals' losses can be in two trained individuals. It's really fascinating. So I think, there's a lot to individualize and customize there from a hydration perspective, potentially down the road. So we'll see where that evolves. I'm excited. So let's see, with regards to kind of some of your athletes and maybe any nutrition behaviors, are there any things you've noticed or have caught your eye with athletes with regards to maybe like underhydrating or any like common nutrition like faux pas you've seen them make that you were able to like give tips on?
Yeah, I would say both of those. Underhydrating and undereating is probably the biggest thing. It's just athletes don't it's not the first thing that comes to mind. I think it's becoming more and more on people's minds now, especially if you pay attention to the endurance world. But I think that's the biggest issue, and then getting them to practice, and that's an even harder thing. It's like, and then how often do you practice, and then also you can't always afford to practice a really high carbohydrate regimen during every workout. I mean, it would cost you $20-$30 to go on a ride. So finding out, starting to plan ahead, giving yourself, 6 to 8 weeks is typically what we recommend as far as preparing for something like Leadville. As far as like changing or trying to help change your gut so that you're able to take that in, or it's more normal than it would be, because that'd be the other mistake is they don't do that much during training. They get to the race, they eat a lot more than they normally do, and then they get sick. And the shorter races, they don't really figure that out. If it's sub 4 hours, you can probably fake it and get away with it. And then if you do get sick, it's going to be after the end. But anytime you go, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, I mean, I had an athlete, our goal was 12 hours and at Leadville, and I was talking to him talking about him to the athlete you were referring to that got second one year, which was 5 hours, 58 minutes. And he was like, I wouldn't even know what to do. My stomach would turn if I'm out there trying to eat he thought it was a much harder thing to be out there for that long. And I agree. I think, those long races you really have to prepare for.
Oh yeah. It seems like there's a lot more. We got to bring energy in so you can finish the race and you don't bonk, right? But the underhydration and underfueling, I think, is definitely a common theme. I mean, for underfueling for sure in endurance athletes, I think across the board, we definitely see in our runners too, like the lack of appetite post running is really common, which then just furthers that underfueling, maybe even outside of training. But do you, kind of talking about getting stuff in, do you find some of your athletes, do they lean towards like fuel in the bottle, or many of them having like hydration in the bottle and like using gels and stuff separately? Or I know with mountain biking, it's kind of hard to open up packets and stuff when you're trying to do a single track or something like that, right?
Yeah. No, it's very individual, and where some athletes will want to drink all their calories, and I have one athlete, she will tape 12 gels on her top tube, and I'm just like, I can never do that. I don't know how you even stomach that, but it works for her. And so it's something I encourage, especially during this time of the year, that at base miles and things, I want you to get out and experiment with all sorts of food, and figure out what works for you. And really what works for you now may not work for you 3 months down the line, but at least you'll have an idea and you're able to make some small changes. And if you can eat real food and you have those opportunities, I think that's always a great option or just to kind of give people the confidence that it's okay to take a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or to make some rice cakes, or have that baked potato in your pocket. It's that works, and you may be surprised. So
yeah, definitely. I think the body recognizes real food probably a little bit, better maybe sometimes. To talk about potatoes, I mean, there's going to be a lot more micronutrients probably in a potato than I think many people realize. So get some potassium, get some good stuff in there. So kind of touching a little bit back on coaching style, I know there's been a big, at least we've seen a lot in the running community right now, is a big emphasis on like including or incorporating more strength workouts. What are your thoughts on that with regards to cyclists? Should that be part of their routine, or what do you think?
Yeah, I do think it should be part of their routine more. Now, I would say that it's not going to make you a faster cyclist because you can squat 50 more pounds. It doesn't mean that you're going to put out 5 more watts of power or anything. But from a health perspective and an overall body perspective, I do think it's important. I think ultimately you're going to train the muscles that you need by out there riding the bike. And you can do some different drills. There's not too many drills on the bike that you can do to increase strength, but there's a couple that you can input and have athletes practice, if that's a weakness or a strong point. Like I coach Jill Kentner. I don't know if you know who she is, but she's probably the top enduro woman in the United States. And
nice.
And yeah, we're doing some, really hard gear stuff right now from a sprinting point of view, because we're trying to work those things. But she also does a lot of strength work because for her sport, it requires that. And so that's much different than say somebody that's going to do Leadville. And so for those type of athletes that need it, then yes. And then for those type of athletes that don't need it as much, we still do some, but it's not a big focus.
Yeah. Is that something like the Leadville type athlete? Would you have them just primarily focusing on strength in that like postseason period, or is it still throughout the training, like in that 6 to 8 week lead up as well?
Yeah, most of it's going to be during the off season, but as you even get through the season, even just doing some sort of maintenance stuff once a week, I think is good for overall body fitness. Having a pulling motion and pushing motion, some squats and some core work, and within 20 minutes you can be done, but kind of maintaining your body, because I mean, ultimately you're not going to be a cyclist for all of your life, and you have to, you maybe you have grandkids, or you're planning on having grandkids and you want to play with them, or you have these other goals that when you're 70 years old that you want to do. So I think we have to think a lot more long term, what's best for the athlete.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there's also a huge like bone benefit to strength training as well, which is important. Obviously, we don't want to, when we're out there on the bike or running, I mean, if we have kind of more brittle bones, we're just at risk if we take a spill. So if we can keep them nice and strong, we can set ourselves up for success there. So kind of with the enduro athlete you mentioned, how many times a week would you suggest someone like that is strength training?
I have a couple of enduro athletes, and both of them are 2 times a week, but they have specific strength coaches. And we just coordinate with each other. Hey, this is what my ideas are. And then as far as like trying to peak for certain events, then they kind of form their plan around what I've seen, what they need to do on the bike, because ultimately that's the most important piece. Yeah. And so, but yeah, it includes, or at least both of these women, they're doing some Olympic lifts and things like that. So
that's great.
Yeah. Which I don't know anything about. So, I mean, I know what they are, but you would not want me in there watching you and designing a plan for you.
Yeah, I hear that. You're the pro in the cycling coaching arena. So kind of talking about that, partnering with a strength coach on that, and then, working around the cycling training, how do you suggest someone kind of incorporate that strength with regards to like maybe their like interval session days, how should those be spaced apart or put together? Or do you suggest they do them on the same day? Like, what are your thoughts on that kind of timing?
I think, whatever's the most important workout, you have to go with that
First.
which if you're talking to me, I would say the cycling workout.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if you're going to work on a day, then you work on a day. So we would typically, if we're going to do some hard intervals, I mean, right now, none of the intervals are too difficult. So it doesn't really matter. I would say it could be on any day because the cycling intervals are so low intensity that it's not, you don't need to be totally recovered to do them. Now, once we start into some VO2 max or things like that, then we'll want to do the cycling workout. Typically, this is what I like to do. I like to have the cycling workout in the morning, and then give them, 4 to 6 hours of some recovery, and then they'll go do their weight workout. And
okay, nice. Yeah.
Maybe a recovery day the next day. So if you are recovering, you're recovering. And then if you are working, you are working. And so you're not, your recovery day, you're not doing an hour and a half strength workout. So
yeah, I think that's smart. Do you ever find that on athletes' recovery days that they still push it too hard, or you have to tell people to like take it back a notch?
Oh, yeah, I think that's my main job, is to hold people back. Most athletes that come to me, I mean, I'm in Rio Rico. I mean, I'm not there in your face, knocking on your door saying, hey, it's time to get up and do your intervals. So it's not, they're going to have their own motivation, or that intrinsic, or I would hope that it's this intrinsic motivation that they have. And that's why they called me. So now I lost, what was the question? So I lost what your question was.
What did I say, Nia? We were talking about strength and timing that. Oh yeah. Going light on the hard, or stopping them from going too hard on the light days. Yes.
Yeah. So they have motivation to go hard. And so that's no problem. It's really the holding back. And right now I'm battling almost every athlete. It's like, it's kind of that season of base for most people. And some of them are stuck indoors, or most of them are stuck indoors, and you're doing this very low intensity, relatively low intensity work. And it's so monotonous and boring, and it's almost harder than going hard as you can. So only a few more weeks, hopefully, for most people, and then we'll switch it up for them.
Yeah. If someone's like feeling very, like really good and they want to push it, I mean, would you still suggest they hold back and like focus on like the long-term plan, or are they going to harbor or like decrease any benefits potentially by just pushing it too hard?
I don't think, in the big picture, they're gonna, destroy all the work that they've done for the past month or the week or something like that. I would just encourage them to continue to do that work, because even, let's say, the beginning of the workout, they go pretty hard and they get their heart rate up. You've already started those systems. So, getting yourself back to aerobic state, even though you may be there from a heart rate and a power standpoint, you've already initiated those other energy systems. So they're working, and it's not just this low. So I would encourage them, if you are going to do something hard, let's put it at the end of the workout. Maybe, at least get in an hour in, or whatever our goal is.
Yeah.
And I would say that's only specific to this time of the year, because I do think it's very important. But, typically if somebody's feeling good and there's like, man, I need to just go hard, then I encourage them to do that. And then we'll adjust your workouts. We'll make recovery tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because I want the athletes to be aware of their body and how they're feeling, and to follow those feelings. And it's the other way too. Like if, you have some VO2 work and you're just not feeling it, we'll take a recovery day. Now, if that happens over and over and over, then we need to talk and see why that's happening, and get a workaround, or figure out what we need to do to solve this problem. But yeah.
Awesome. I think that's great advice. I remember working with a client early on and him telling me that he just like felt like he had to hammer like every session every day. And like, he couldn't follow the, like, take it easy. You don't need to be that, it doesn't need to be that intense. But, so he did have a really hard time with that. And he actually, I think, put himself in a place of honestly overtraining, because we were having a really hard time with his body composition as well. And I think he put himself in a hard place. But yeah, so I think doing the light days light and keeping the hard days hard when you can, I think is definitely good advice. I want to be mindful of time here. So I think we might want to dive into the 2 truths and a lie reveal. So I will recap for our listeners. You've coached athletes on every continent, right? As one of them, stripped down a sailplane and rebuilt it and flew it. And then you were the lead in a high school musical, but then asked not to sing. So Nia and I said the third one, High School Musical, is a lie, but you let us know, Jason, what was the lie today?
The lie was the first one. I have coached an athlete on every continent, but I have not raced my bike. I'm missing Africa and Australia at this point, and Antarctica.
All right.
The other 2 are true.
Yeah, awesome. That's very exciting. The High School Musical situation. That's interesting. They put you lead and wouldn't let you sing?
I think it was a matter of default. It was a good thing that I didn't sing, because if you heard me, you would probably say, all right, I understand. So.
Yeah. Awesome. And so where can people find you? Are you taking on any new athletes these days, or your coaches taking on any new athletes?
Yeah, we have a little capacity. I pretty much limit myself to 25 athletes at the start of the year, and I'm at 22 right now. So, and then Coach Chad Byer is also taking some athletes, and Coach Jeff Welch. So yeah.
Perfect.
And they can find me at gotenac.com. That's GOTENAC.com.
Perfect. Awesome. And then you're on Instagram, the socials, people can find you on there?
The only one I'm on is Instagram, yes. And I'm not very good at it. I hired a person to do it for a while, and they did a great job, and then they moved on, and now it's me. So it's every so often there's a post on there.
I hear you. Nia's my saving grace for our social media channels. Awesome. Well, we will make sure for the listeners to include the links to Go Tenac. So if you guys are looking for a coach, check out Jason and then your Instagram handle, and we will be sharing this and hoping our listeners kind of tune in and sign up with you and get some amazing coaching skills. So thanks again for joining us, Jason.
No, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.